Hi, I'm Adam Becker, and this is Streaming Against the Machine. Today, I'm really excited about our guest, but before I talk about him, I want to give you a little bit of background about why I brought him on. So, I wrote a book called More Everything Forever, and it's about the horrible ideas that tech billionaires have about the future and why they don't work and the weird places that they got those ideas. But that's not the true name of the book. The true name of the book, in like the sort of, fantasy novel Ursula Le Guin, like names have power sense, is not More Everything Forever. It's These Fucking People. Because I would work on the book every day for years. And at the end of the day, I would call a friend or text a friend and say, these fucking people, you cannot believe what these fucking people want to do, what they believe. It's crazy and it's driving me nuts. And there's a reason that this podcast is not just, these fucking people or about these fucking people. I thought about it, but I decided that that would be bad for me and bad for my mental health because I don't want to have to keep texting and calling my friends at the end of the day and say, oh my God, these fucking people. In fact, the question that I get the most often about the book is how do I stay sane writing about these fucking people? And the answer that I usually give is literally touching grass. I go hiking, I go outside, I play with my cat, I spend time with human beings face to face without a screen or a microphone involved. And that keeps me sane. But that also brings us to today's guest, Dave Karpf. Dave has an appetite for the work of these fucking people that somehow exceeds my own. I don't know how he does that, but he will read what these guys write, and then he will write long social media threads about them and post reviews on his website about their work. And that's actually how I met Dave. I met Dave because I needed to find a reviewer for my book manuscript for a grant that I got from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Fancy, very NPR of me, I know, but they wanted me to find reviewers for the book, academic experts, and Dave is a professor at George Washington University. And I came across his posts about the same people that I was writing about and said, oh, this guy is perfect for this. And so I asked him if he would review the manuscript, and he did, and he wrote back saying how much he liked it, and we became friends, and he is a delight. And I am very excited for all of you to hear the conversation that we had. And also, that is another answer to the question of how I stay sane, which is I talk about this stuff with people like Dave. And I think that in doing that, in talking about these fucking people, we can build community and we can talk not just about bad ideas about the future, but also what a good future might look like, which is what this podcast is about. And so while a lot of this episode is Dave and I talking about terrible ideas, we also had a really good time and we had a lot of fun. And I think that you can feel and hear that we have a lot of hope. And I certainly hope that you like it. Dave, welcome to Dreaming Against the Machine.
Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. So Dave is a professor. He's a professor at George Washington University, professor of what I think of you as an internet politics curmudgeon.
Yeah. So my degree is in political science.
Okay.
I'm a professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs.
Okay.
Because I'm the type of political scientist who studies weird internet things and therefore gets hired to a different department.
Yeah, that tracks. You do study
Yep.
weird internet things, and you also post long threads on Blue Sky about books that you read that you hate. And then you keep reading terrible books. And Dave, it has me worried about you. Like, why do you do this to yourself?
So I think what your listeners should know is you have continually tried to talk me out of this.
Yes.
And the fact that I still do it means that you have not made a compelling enough argument yet. I'm going to keep on hurting myself like this until Adam Becker raises his game and convinces me to stop doing psychic damage to myself.
Wow. Okay. So what you're saying is that this is all my fault.
I'm saying that like people around me who know and care about me should stop me, and they have failed to do so. So like the collective, it's like not just you. You're not my only friend, but like there should be an intervention. You should be participating in it, and none of you have stepped up to bat yet. So yeah, I do these hate read threads. And the serious answer, I wrote a post a few months ago discussing hate reading as method. I think there's a lot of intellectual value in taking the books that people in power take seriously, to read them and sort of get a sense of like, what is my problem with them? Because particularly as an academic, if I'm just reading other academics, then I'm going to argue with my peers about the stuff that we see important as being important. And we're off to the side. So we should also be looking at money and power and saying, wow, those guys are fucking idiots. So I do that. Like 1 in 10 books I'll hate read.
Okay. If it's only 1 in 10 books, you must read a lot of books because you've got a lot of these hate read threads.
So I have done 1 or 2 hate reads so far this year, and I've read 30 books so far this year, and it's mid-February. I read a lot. I read a lot of books.
Yeah. No. Okay. Great. No, I'm envious. I wish I had the time to read that many books.
Again, I want to point out to your listeners, what you're doing right now is failing to dissuade me. Terrible persuasion. You just told me it was fine. I'm going to keep doing it.
No, I did not say it was fine. I said that you're reading a lot of books, and that reading a lot of books is good.
I heard social permission in there. Anyway.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. This is Dave, everyone. I mean, look, to be completely honest, my serious answer is I think that you're right. Right. And I also think that 1 in 10 is actually a healthy proportion. I just didn't realize that you read so many books. That's amazing and wonderful. But no, I think that you're completely right. I think that it's important to read the books that powerful people take seriously, even if they're bad, so we can understand why they're bad. And I also think that asking everyone to read those books not only would inflict too much psychic damage on everyone, but is also too heavy of a lift. And so really, Dave, it's not that I am failing to dissuade you from this. It's that I like using you as a human shield.
You're offering me as a sacrifice to the volcano.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
All right. That's good.
Yeah.
So long as it makes for good content.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. That's all that really matters here in our world of hyper online late capitalism.
Indeed.
Is, good latest content and commitment to the bit. Also, of course, I'd be a hypocrite, right? Because I've done the same thing.
You have done a medium amount of hate reading for sure.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a good chunk of the research I did for More Everything Forever. And I've also done, I did a book review last year of a terrible book for The Atlantic.
Which you then discussed with me on like a video podcast. We got to
make
fun of that together. It's good times.
Yeah, no, that's true. That book, for our listeners, that book was If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies by Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nate Suarez. I don't know how to pronounce his Suarez. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Yeah. Also, let's call him Nate. Nate said that he didn't really write any of the book, that he instead edited it down from Yudkowsky's original manuscript. And I find that very easy to believe, having unfortunately read the whole book, which is not that long, which is one of the good things about it, maybe the only good thing. That book is terrible. I reviewed it in The Atlantic. You can have a look at that if you're interested. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know that I don't think that you, dear listeners, should take Eliezer Yudkowsky seriously about anything, but you should not. And anyone who does, I think, is not really being very serious themselves. Mm-hmm. But, Dave, we could talk about many, many different books, but instead we said that today we were going to talk about 2 books. One of them is this book that you posted some excerpts from online in one of your threads, and I read some of those excerpts, and I just started seeing red.
Yeah.
And lost consciousness for a moment. And then when I came back to reality, I was just surrounded by blood. I don't know what happened or where I was, but the authorities haven't caught me yet. Anyway, tell us about that book.
Yes, this is a book by James Pethokoukis. I might be mispronouncing his last name. I don't know.
That's what we do here on Dreaming Against the Machine, apparently, we mispronounce people's last names who write terrible books, and so we don't care. Anyway.
If you want us to know how to pronounce your name right, write a better book.
That's right.
He wrote a book called The Conservative Futurist, and Yeah, like I had seen this referenced a lot, particularly because within the sort of abundance space,
Oh God.
the tent that the abundance crowd wants to build includes conservatives,
Right.
and he's kind of the respectable conservative who gets included in that tent.
Respectable in scare quotes here, heavy scare quotes.
Yeah, though like what I will grant to him is he he is a conservative who doesn't like Trump. And like when he
Okay.
wrote this book in 2023, he was saying things like, "Yeah, like I'm a conservative futurist, we should have a lot of immigration." And then Trump got elected, and instead of being one of the conservatives who say, "I didn't mean that, I believe whatever he says," instead he like started rumbling and mumbling about how like, this isn't gonna go well. And like when Trump did his tariffs, he's the type of guy who's like, "Tariffs are dumb, what are you doing?"
Okay.
I will grant that, like, as conservative, if we're starting at like the level of conservative intellectuals, how internally consistent are they? He's
Right.
internally consistent. So yeah, I
Okay.
wanted to read it as sort of a what is the serious version of conservative techno-futurism and techno-optimism. Like I actually kept thinking to myself, is this more meant to drive me crazy or more meant to drive Adam Becker specifically crazy? It's kind of six of one, half dozen the other. Like the two of
Wow.
us could do a dramatic reading and decide, like, in this particular passage, is he unintentionally aiming at you or at me? But yeah, in
Oh
the
my
introduction,
God.
this one is aimed at you. In the introduction, he raises Carl Sagan's pale blue dot, his pale blue dot essay, and then it's like, yeah, no, he said we should focus here on Earth instead of Mars, but I don't know. I think if he had stuck around and seen Elon Musk, now he would want us to go to Mars. And I posted that, and you were like, nope. And like, you're more a Sagan guy than I am. So like, that one's aimed at you for sure.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
I believe my
yeah.
exact response was, who do I have to fight? Where do I have to go to fight him?
But then later, there's a passage where he starts getting into 1990s Wired magazines and misreading them.
Oh yeah, that's aimed right at you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your listeners might not know, I read the entire back catalog of Wired twice. Once for Wired and once for my book that's coming out next year. So it's like, I'm sorry, motherfucker. Like, I think I actually wrote Pistols at Dawn. Like, that was my reaction to that. So he kind of like, I don't think he knows that he's like trying to pick a fight with you and me, but he definitely is. He absolutely is.
Okay, I mean, this is great because that means that, there's two of us and only one of him.
How,
So,
how would you do in a fight? Because I would do real bad in a fight.
I mean, I'm large, I contain multitudes. Um, yeah, I'll just throw a book of Walt Whitman at him. Anyway.
That sounds good. There we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Projectiles
exactly.
will work for me. Okay, good.
Yeah. But yeah, okay, so this is a guy who has cleared the incredibly low bar that most of the Republican Party has not managed to clear. And he's written a book aiming right at both of us unintentionally. What is he trying to say in this thing?
What he's trying to say is we could have, and this isn't going to be a direct quote, but it's a close paraphrase.
Yeah.
Like we could have the techno future that was imagined in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Like he references the Jetsons a lot.
No.
And yeah. So like we could have that if only we re-embraced the optimism of those days
God.
and unleashed our innovators. Like, like he wants to get rid of the National Environmental Policy Act, like get rid of NEPA, get rid of any regulations that slow Silicon Valley and builders down, and that will supercharge the economy. And if you supercharge the economy, then all the innovations will just flow. And the thing that is especially aimed at you is like there are other books where you're going to talk about, like another book in a minute that tries to do the science. He doesn't even try to do the science. Like he is a finance journalist who isn't even really an economist. And his sort of gestures towards, like he gestures at nanotech and like all the, it's like he read Drexler and he's like, well, if Drexler says it, it must be right. Like, so it's all of that sort of paper thin.
Wait. Hold on.
Uh-huh.
He said, if Drexler said it, it must be right. Like that's his attitude.
That's not a direct quote, but
Right.
His attitude on nanotech. He thinks we could have nanobots swimming through our bloodstreams if only we had kept economic growth high enough that the builders could have just built it. Like he thinks that the way science works is just provide enough money to the wealthy people, and the innovators will do it so long as we stay optimistic. And there's just nothing more than that. So it ends up being this pretty long book that's actually like very, very thin. He does like a brief like pastiche of history in which he says things like, yeah, the 1960s were total optimism with like no like social fighting. And it's like, buddy, I don't know if you've ever talked to a historian of the 1960s or like paid attention to it, but you know, no, there was actually some social strife in the 60s. Don't know if you heard about it. Like Chicago 1968, famously not all that happy-go-lucky peaceful.
Yeah.
And then he thinks in the 1970s that we got bummed out. The economy got bad because of stagflation, and then the mood darkened, and also we turned against nuclear power. And ever since then, we've been stuck in a rut, but we can get out of it if we just have good, positive sci-fi and good feelings and low regulations and low taxes. And it's just so embarrassingly thin. And this is the best they got.
Okay, there's so many places we got to go from here, but first I just want to say,
you need a minute, right?
Yeah, I need a sec. You know, there are a lot of reasons why Nick, my producer, and I decided that this was not going to be a video podcast, but right now, just in this moment, I'm regretting that a little bit. Not enough to change it. It's still going to be audio only, but like, I was making some faces a minute ago.
Listeners are missing some great reaction shots right now.
Yeah, sorry, folks, I mean, we might end up using a little bit of that video for the social or something. We also need to go back and explain who Drexler is.
Sure.
And also we need to explain why you're saying this is the best they've got, because like who's taking this guy seriously? And of course we have to introduce the other book. But let's start with Drexler. Eric Drexler is a guy. And that's it. Yeah, Eric Drexler's a guy. He is a guy who sort of came up with the modern sci-fi conception of what nanotechnology is. The idea of like little nanobots that live in your blood and fix all of the possible diseases that you could get. Little nanobots that, you know, run around in the world and make anything that you would want them to make. This is an idea that he didn't originate it, but he developed it and put it into the public consciousness. Especially in the 80s is really when it happened with his book, Engines of Creation, which I think was 1986. And then he had a follow-up in the early 90s, the name of which is escaping me, that was supposed to be more technical, but really just had a bunch of diagrams without explaining how they would be built. And I think it was called Nanosystems. But basically, Drexler's vision of nanotech is something that was considered and ultimately roundly rejected by actual scientists doing actual work with nanoscale systems, like systems the size of, you know, not individual atoms, but like small numbers of atoms. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we're not going to get into that because that's a whole podcast episode by itself. I have some of that in More Everything Forever, but there are very good scientific and engineering reasons why Drexler's ideas did not work out, and he is no longer taken seriously and was never taken particularly seriously. And one of the things I want to come back to about what you just said about this guy whose name I just remember was long and not particularly easy for me to remember or pronounce. He is part of this cohort of people, and there's a lot of them in my book and a lot of them who've written other books that you've done threads about, who believe that somewhere buried in the economy or somewhere in government or somewhere in the world, there's a big dial labeled like speed of progress. And you can just turn that dial faster or slower. And it has numbers on it. And those numbers mean something. And if you just turn it up, then things go faster. And what things and what it means for them to go faster, you know, these are not questions that concern such people.
Yeah. And so there's two bits I would add on to that.
Yeah.
One, again, just to give you a sprinkling of Pethokoukis's book.
Yeah.
Everybody who he read as a kid, like all the sci-fi authors he just calls futurists, including Isaac Asimov.
No.
So like Asimov like did an article in I think 1964 where he's imagining the future in like 2014.
Sure.
And to Pethokoukis, he's just like, well, though, like if the genius futurists said that that's what the world would be, then clearly we would have that. And if we don't have that, it's because we got bummed out, as opposed to like, hey man, maybe the science didn't science.
Yeah.
That also means that he's like lifting up Alvin Toffler's book, Future
God,
Shock.
of course. Yeah.
And like Future Shock is a fun read if you're reading it for like the wild stuff that people imagine the future would be in the early 1970s. But it's like, yeah, no, everybody's going to live in underwater cities. And like Pethokoukis reads that and is like, yeah, why don't we have underwater cities? If we just increased global domestic production enough, then surely we would have that. Wouldn't that be cool?
Pethokoukis, no.
Yeah. So like, there's that. But the thing that I wanted to add on to the dial bit is this entire intellectual community is wrapped around a point that Tyler Cowen and a few other economists have made.
Right.
That progress slows down in the 70s.
Yeah. And
they're telling themselves a story about why did progress and innovation and like, sure, we had the internet, but that didn't really count. Like where are flying cars, to get to the other book, but like in general, why did we no longer have that? And the basic story that they tell is that's because the environmental movement gained power in the 1970s, created all this regulatory burden, and that's the reason why we don't have energy that's too cheap to meter. It's because of the damned environmentalists, and everything since then is also because the damned environmentalists made regulations like too powerful, and they've been in charge ever since. I'm on the board of the Sierra Club. I've been with the Sierra Club on and off throughout my life. It like the thing that strikes me is like, my fella, you were forgetting that there was this dude named Reagan in the 1980s. Maybe the environmentalists passed a lot of stuff in the 1970s, some of it great, some of it with unintended consequences. But like, if you think that I'm still in charge here, like my brother, what's wrong with you? Like, I'm not that big of a deal.
Yeah, in what world do environmentalists have or have ever had that much power? Are you serious? Like,
we had a moment in the early 70s. And like, it is true. This gets into the abundance thing, because the abundance people are like, hey, it's probably too hard to build now, and that's a problem for clean energy. And it kind of is. Like, the figuring out an environmentalism that is pro developing good stuff is actually like a hard and complicated project.
Absolutely.
But like so that's where these guys fit in with them. But all of these guys are just obsessed with like that time in the 70s when they lost, and they believe that that's when we got diverted from like the Tomorrowland Walt Disney dreams, and if only the damned environmentalists would go away and we could go back to like the like sunny side, like sunny optimism of sci-fi in the 60s, then yada yada yada, we would be living on Mars and also like underwater, and like everything would be perfect. And it's just so unserious, and they all say the same things.
There's so much there, but for whatever reason, what I'm like latching onto right now, why would you want to live under the ocean? Did you listen to the song Under the Sea too many times as a kid and like took it really literally and didn't watch the rest of the movie? Like you want to meet Sebastian the Crab and you think that down where it's wetter, everything's better. Like I don't understand the appeal of living under the ocean. Like I kind of understand the appeal of living on an island, right? Until you start thinking about the fact that it's going to be very, very expensive to bring in stuff that you need. That's not possible to make on the island. Living on an island seems fun, and people do live on islands, and there's lots of wonderful things about islands. But under, why? Like, I mean, putting aside the massive technical challenges to building something that could withstand so much pressure. Oh my God. It's so crazy to me how many times these people have ideas like the immediate first response that you would have turns out to be actually the right response once you dig into it more. It's like, oh, but if you lived under the sea, wouldn't you get crushed by the water and then drown when it broke your habitat? And like, yeah, it's the first thing I think of. And then when you look into it more and do a bunch of reading and a bunch of research, that's still the problem. Like, that's a huge problem.
So I have two thoughts. One is a joke and the other is serious. So the joke is, Adam, what you're not understanding is that you would just build nanotech shields to make sure that the water doesn't crush you. Duh. With enough gross domestic product, I'm sure we could do it. Come on, it's just nanotech. That's the joke. That's a joke.
Yeah, no. I'm just glad that I naturally have like low blood pressure, because otherwise I'd be having a stroke right now. But please continue. Yes.
To the serious bit that like I think matters for understanding this crowd is the dream of living under the ocean. Like what you're doing now is what I would call techno-pragmatism, which is really thinking about like, how would that work? And what are the challenges we would run into and why? And what they're engaging with is instead, I would say, the appeal of a frontier still to be conquered. Right? Like when they imagine like, people will live under the ocean. I don't think he's saying like, you know what I really want to do is take my wife, and I think he has like 7 kids. Like me and my wife and 7 kids are all going to live underwater where we can't escape. Like that doesn't sound fun for the kids. But he's not imagining that. What he's imagining is like in a bygone era in which people could go encounter a frontier and like expand the horizons. And this guy who both wants us to live underwater and wants us to travel through space clearly wants to be able to still have a frontier. And I do think that like basic appeal of, you know, like I wouldn't want to be a frontier settler either. Like that life's terrible. But like that idea of, oh, in bygone times there were frontiers left to conquer and now they're gone, and so everything feels smaller. Let's go find another frontier. Like there is some base appeal to like a lot of people's psyche in that. And the pragmatist saying like, yeah, but A, that doesn't work, and B, even if it did, would it be worth it? That's the reason why certainly I, and I think you, are kind of bummers at parties.
I don't know, Dave. People like me at parties. Speak for yourself.
People, including me, don't like me at parties. And I think if you were at a party with me, I would have I would bring out the wrong thing, and they'd be like, Adam, what? No. This side of you, absolutely not.
God. No, I have been known to bum people out at parties. I just, I try not to, but, oh God. Okay. So once again, here on Dreaming Against the Machine, we just talk about Turner's Frontier thesis over and over again. Dave, can you tell us, I mean, you're a political scientist. Tell us about Turner's Frontier thesis, and that will take us very nicely into the next book that we are going to talk about.
So Frederick Jackson Turner, this is 1893.
Sounds right.
Declares the closing of the American frontier, which is debated since then, since the very notion of the frontier imagined that there were no Native Americans living in these areas, that, they were going west, young man. But also from a policy perspective, there were decades and decades in which the American ideal included there is still more America to go and populate. And so you can do that. And in fact, that's part of what makes America different from Europe. Like in Europe, all the land has been settled, and therefore they have to deal with the cross pressures that come of living together. And the idea of America for a long time involves this mythology of, no, it's a new continent, and so we can spread out and we can keep on spreading. So he declares the ending of the frontier, which sets off an awful lot of sort of mass psychic alarm bells. One of which I'll admit is a lot of the old conservation movement is people saying like, oh, now that we have occupied the whole frontier, we need to worry about running out of natural preserves. So we need to protect it. Like that's some of what John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt are doing, sort of to wear my environmentalist hat instead of my political science hat. But then it also then sort of leads to the development of the American state of like, okay, how do we take care of ourselves? And you have all sorts of, subsets of powerful, influential people saying, we don't like this idea that the frontier is now closed. Let's go find another frontier.
Right. And along with that comes this notion that without a frontier, we will stagnate and bad things will happen. And so a frontier is vital and essential to the American project and by extension, humanity. Yeah. Okay. And that brings us to a book that really feels like a spiritual partner to, the conservative futurist. Where Is My Flying Car by J. Storrs Hall.
Let's note, genuinely good name for a book. Like bad book to take up such a good name.
Yeah, I agree. Although I do think that the most important word in the title of that book is my. Where is my flying car? Right? I actually think a better title for a better book would be Where is the Flying Car? Or Where is our flying car? But Where is my flying car, I think, reveals some stuff about J. Storrs Hall.
Yep.
who's an associate of Eric Drexler, early nanotech guy, and, develops various ideas for nanotechnology that are not workable for a variety of reasons. So Hall's book, which I read in the process of writing my book, and I think you read, Dave, a very long time ago.
I read a couple years ago also as research for my book.
Okay, yeah, that's a very long time ago. That's about when I read it. Sure. Yeah. But what's striking to me is how many of the same notes it hits as, I'm sorry, the other author's name again, please.
Pethokoukis.
Yeah, Pethokoukis and Hall hit many of the same notes.
Yeah.
There was a slowdown in the 70s. It was caused by the environmental movement, although Hall points to, a few other culprits, but the environmentalists are a big chunk of what he has in mind. And if that hadn't happened, we would already have nanotechnology and we would go to space and live forever. And we can just find that giant dial, labeled speed of progress and turn it back up again. And that will supercharge the economy, or, other way around, we supercharge the economy and that will. Hall's particular thing, the particular place he thinks that dial resides is in energy consumption per capita.
Yep.
Something he calls the Henry Adams curve. He says we were on it for the first 200 years of the American experiment. And then sometime in the 70s, we fell off that curve. And that's when things started going wrong. And what's also striking to me is he also hits certain notes that you might not expect him to hit in common with this other book. He also says that the 40s and 50s were, this period of great, communal spirit and everybody getting along and working together towards similar projects. And a can-do attitude that was shared across all of America and led to great comedy and peace, and as opposed to civil strife. And I find this interesting. Do you know how old Pethokoukis is?
He's Gen X, but I think on the older side of Gen X.
That is exactly
born, early 60s.
That's exactly what I was going to guess. So this is perfect. And I wish I'd made that guess before you gave the answer. He says the 60s were all good, and forgets, all of the stuff that happened in the 60s, right? Hall says the 40s and 50s were all good. He was born in the late 40s, early 50s. So really what these guys are remembering is everything in the world seemed fine when I was a kid.
Yep.
And it's like, I don't know, man. I seem to recall all kinds of really serious problems, Hall actually says, I think he points to the period 1930 to 1960. I am having trouble thinking of any period in there where there wasn't some very serious domestic unrest in the US, right? I mean, also wild to start that in 1930. Are you kidding me? The Great Depression?
Hey, it was great. It's right there on the title.
Make the Depression great again? Is that where we're going with it?
Guess so.
Jesus Christ. But yeah, Hall claims to have the engineering chops and scientific understanding to bring hard data and, engineering know-how to back up the kinds of claims that Pethokoukis and Hall both make in their books.
Yeah.
And, putting on my physicist hat, no,
right.
Absolutely not. I mean, Hall... This is a book where Hall claims that cold fusion is a viable possibility. Cold fusion being nuclear fusion, which is something that humanity has been able to do artificially in nuclear weapons, but never in a controlled way to generate power. The reason why we haven't been able to do that is that it's very, very difficult to get atoms to fuse. You have to make them very, very hot. Cold fusion is this supposed shortcut that was quote unquote discovered in the 1980s and is now a paradigmatic example of junk science. It was tested many times over and found not real. Which, makes some sense. There's no theory to explain how it could have been real. And yet Hall thinks that it was suppressed by a conspiracy. Which actually I want to hark back to an earlier thing that you said, the stuff about the environmentalists who both of these guys, go to. It's just got me thinking about like this idea that there's this one powerful group that, has control of the levers of the world. And if we can just dislodge them, then we would have control of those levers. And then we could find the knob that says, make stuff go fast and turn it up. And like, it's just a very simplistic view of the world. It's not how anything actually works. And it is, it's a common feature of conspiracy theories. And there is something. I'm not calling these guys conspiracy theorists. I don't actually think that they are, but there is something conspiratorial about how they view the world.
Yeah, and what stands out to me is I have a chapter in my forthcoming book, which you'll get to read, and folks will get to read next year.
Yeah,
but it's about the title is what Silicon Valley imagines a scientist to be, and I think that's the through line is like these guys are like they're fans of science rather than scientists, and they imagine that if you can imagine it, then science can achieve it. If only we are motivated enough and give them enough time, freedom, and funding. That the geniuses will go and create. And they look at the 70s and say like, well, the geniuses went and created. They did all this magical stuff until then. And that means that we must have screwed up. So then they find someone to blame. But they really do imagine, like in that chapter, one of the things that I sort of have an aside talking about is Theranos. Because like Theranos is a fascinating example of Silicon Valley saying, oh, well, this like pre-med student at Stanford has a really good slide deck saying, I can just overturn all of medical biology and do these tests better and cheaper and faster and more effective if you give me money. And they say like, yeah, if we give her money, like that sounds great. We'll give her money. She'll hire the scientists and they'll just science that up. And the problem with that was, why would we think like a 19 or 20-year-old like Stanford dropout who's mostly an entrepreneur would be able to overturn all of medical science like that? Like, it's not impossible, but it's pretty unlikely. But that doesn't fit, because when Silicon Valley looks at anything else, it's like, yeah, we'll just disrupt that with the market. And they just figure like science will work that way too, right? And it doesn't. Like science is messier than that. And doesn't just do what you want it to do if you stuff enough money and genius in it for long enough. But I think that sort of like childlike conception, one of my bits in the thread about Pethokoukis's book is like, I keep on repeating, like, it seems like you're 12. Right? Because it really is sort of a conception of the world where like, if I demand this thing happen and mom stop being a bummer and let me stay up past my bedtime, then it will happen. And like, that's fine for fans. And it's like a little sad, but it's fine for fans so long as they have no power. But again, like tech billionaires take this very seriously and then use that to bend the government in the direction of what they imagine they can make money off of. Like that's where it gets bad, is that these guys are like Hall's book is terrible. It's also like Ezra Klein described it as reactionary futurism, which I thought was a great term for it.
Unfortunately, we still live in capitalism, and that means we need to talk about our partners and sponsors. But fortunately, our partners and sponsors are really great. And if you want to support Dreaming Against the Machine directly, you can join us on Patreon, where $5 a month gives you the chance to ask questions of upcoming guests and a dedicated stream of cat pictures. We love our patrons, and we also love Multitude at multitudeshows.com. Multitude is a podcast company made up of passionate people creating shows you can count on. We are one of those shows, and another one of those shows is This Guy Sucked. This Guy Sucked is a history podcast for haters by haters. Join historian Dr. Claire Aubin and a new expert every week to pull back the scholarly curtain on some of the world's biggest bummers. From Charlemagne to Carl Schmitt, every episode gives listeners all the ammo they need to win dinner table arguments over why history's main characters were actually kind of the worst. No dead person is safe, and the show's guests prove that the best part of understanding the past is criticizing it. New episodes every Thursday wherever you listen to podcasts. And here's a word from our sponsors. I'm glad you brought up Klein, because Klein also says something about that book that I think is very telling, and also brings us back to his whole, abundance thing, and then this abundance movement that his book Abundance is like, the giant ad for. Klein says in that, Ezra Klein has an article talking about Hall's book, Where's My Flying Car? It's in the New York Times. I want to say early 23, early
Sounds
24, right. Something like that. Yeah. One of the things, he calls it reactionary futurism. He correctly recognizes that Hall is like embarking on a kind of very politically conservative project there. But then he says that Hall's technical analyses are as careful as his political analyses are, misguided, or something like something to that effect. That's a close paraphrase of what Klein says. Yeah. And of course, at this point, I would just urge Ezra Klein to ask himself, like, why do you think that you can judge that? Mm-hmm. Like, there's this thing called Gell-Mann amnesia, supposedly named after Murray Gell-Mann, the physicist, where, you read a part of something written by someone who's not an expert, like a journalist or something, in an area where you have expertise, and you think, oh, well, they got all sorts of stuff wrong. And then you read something else in the same newspaper, maybe by the same journalist on a different subject, and you forget that they got the stuff that wrong. Mm-hmm. And you just believe them on the other stuff. And this is, maybe a charitable interpretation of what happened to Klein reading this book. He just looked at this stuff and thought, oh, I guess, I see charts and numbers, so I guess that means that this is a careful technical analysis. And like, my brother, you have no idea what you're talking about. This book, the technical analyses are not careful. Actually, this is another thing that it has in common with Pethokoukis' book. He talks about the Jetsons quite a bit in Where's My Flying Car? And I actually talked to Hall. I interviewed him for my book, and I asked him, what was the deal with that? Why do you keep bringing up the Jetsons and say that the Jetsons, because he brings up the Jetsons to say that it's the most realistic depiction of what the future could look like in all of science fiction, which, let's just take a moment. Woo. Yeah. But I asked him, why so much of the Jetsons in this book? And he said, oh, well, it actually started out as something that I was writing for like the 50th anniversary of the Jetsons.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, okay. And then it turned into this thing. But this is, going back to Klein, though, this is one of the problems that I see with the abundance people, is that they are similarly credulous about what science and technology can do if you just unleash the power to build. And like, I am not saying that we shouldn't build more housing, right? I think building more housing is a good idea. I am not saying that we, shouldn't. Well, let me get rid of that double negative. I agree that we should make it easier to permit green energy projects and build them faster. Absolutely. Like, but I think we both read Abundance, and to me, and maybe this is my Gell-Mann amnesia at work, the parts of the book that I liked the least were the parts of that covered material I knew the best, right? I don't know that much about housing policy or permitting policy. And so I thought, oh, okay, this seems plausible. And then I got to the stuff about science funding policy. I was like, are you kidding me? That is not how anything works. And oh my God, you're citing Jay Bhattacharya credulously? What's wrong with you? And where did you get these figures about you got all this stuff from like the progress studies people who are involved in Tyler Cowen's, whole thing that you were talking about earlier this episode. It's just crazy to me how confident these people are talking about science funding policy when they clearly don't know anything about how actual scientific research is conducted. And they never talk to anyone who really does know about that, or else they wouldn't be making these mistakes. Instead, they sort of started from the place they wanted to go, right?
So I have a couple thoughts. One is and so I did another one of these threads about the abundance book, and then I wrote it up as a book review on my blog. I would call myself abundance curious.
Okay.
There is a version of the abundance argument that I quite like.
Okay.
And it dates back, a guy named Steve Tellez, who wrote about this a few years ago, calling it state capacity liberalism. And Steve is kind of they call him the godfather of abundance.
Okay, let's take us, hold on just for a sec. What's state capacity?
State capacity is the ability of the government to do stuff.
Okay,
right? So the like sentence length version of abundance, at least from Ezra Klein's version, and this is a sentence length version that I agree with, is when the government decides a thing is good and we ought to do it, the government should then provide funding to go and try to do that thing. And from like a democratic theory standpoint, if the government was able to implement its policies in like a full-throated manner, then people could look at it and say, do I like that or not? And then vote in response. Whereas a thing that came up post-Obamacare, a thing that came up post Inflation Reduction Act, is like the government would do a big thing, and it takes so long for the government to then actually get out of its own way and do the stuff that voters don't have the feedback of like, how did that go? Did it actually improve our lives? What should we do about it? So the basic idea there is when government decides something should be a priority, it should spend a lot of money on that and also reduce some of the regulatory hurdles so it can get it done. And a place that I disagree with them on is like, I think they make there's a bunch of evidence of like, in practice, when it's a high priority, the government actually is decently good at doing that. So like I don't think it's a slam dunk case that they're making, but there's a version of abundance that basically says like, yeah, if the government decides that scientific research is a priority, then it should create a big pot of money for scientific research and then go at it. Or like the Inflation Reduction Act or the infrastructure bill, like those are examples of a version of abundance that says government should have like infrastructure, like we should have infrastructure policy and we should fund it and like then fund it through taxes. And like that's kind of my ideal, like that's abundance-ish. Like if a city thinks like we don't have enough housing, the city should spend a lot of money to build more houses. And then also maybe make it a little bit easy, like look at, are we making it too hard? And if so, like go and fix those processes. And then when you get into the details, that's where things do get a little fuzzy. I want to grant them a little bit of space that like they wrote that book. This is in my review of it. I think they wrote that book for a world that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Like I think they were writing a book for the world where Kamala Harris gets elected and then needs like big picture policy priorities that she tells people who are detail oriented, go figure out the details on how to do the exact science policy. But like, we're going to make science a priority. So a bunch of money towards it and like lines in the State of the Union towards it. And in that world, I think it's a pretty useful book, but instead it ends up being a book in a world where instead like the thing the government is doing a lot of is deporting everybody who it decides looks vaguely like, well, just straight up non-white.
Yeah.
And in that world, like we've got a lot of other problems and this seems like a silly thing. And also in that world, they're building relationships with a bunch of conservatives who aren't quite offensive enough, ends up looking a little weird.
Yeah, I'm also going to push back a little bit. Like, I see what you're saying. I don't think that you're completely wrong, but I think you're a little bit wrong. And maybe this shifts us toward the end of the podcast here, where we're talking about maybe what we might want a good future to look like, because we've been
making fun of people a lot.
Hard on these people who are proposing Jetson's future, but what do we have in response? The thing I want to push back on is specifically that the abundance people are not just saying science should be a priority, let's put a bunch of money towards science. I mean, we did put a lot of money towards science up until Trump and Musk and Doge started trying to destroy, the national research infrastructure that has been around since, the end of World War II. The abundance people are saying, oh, the way that we fund science is too slow and too risk averse. And the evidence that they present for that is laughably bad. So it's not just that it's thin evidence. Like the first is that it's bad evidence. The second is some of the evidence that they are citing is coming from people who are not arguing in good faith, or were not arguing in good faith when they put that evidence together and had an ideological project in mind to do exactly what we're seeing now, which is how you end up with Ezra Klein citing Jay Bhattacharya in that book. Jay Bhattacharya, currently the head of the NIH. I would say, I mean, first of all, scary to see from someone as influential as Klein. And second, dangerously credulous on his part. It's a problem. And I would really love to understand how he sees that now, in the unlikely event that I ever get to ask him about this. But like, I think that we are actually seeing now the fruits of a long-term effort to paint the national research, scientific research funding infrastructure as broken in the ways that the book Abundance claims that it is without good evidence. And, I think that's a very serious problem at the heart of the book. And, I would love to see a world where we give more money and a freer hand to people doing fundamental scientific research that is not specifically aiming at a particular practical outcome. But one of the things that the Abundance guys, or at least the book Abundance, has in common with, the Conservative Futurist and Where Is My Flying Car, that book opens with this picture of the future. That's fine. But it opens by saying something like, we need to build more stuff and invent more of what we need. And like, buddy, that is not how scientific research works. You can't just say, this is the thing that we need, so we have to invent it.
So I want to defend them a little bit.
Okay, and then we're gonna wrap it up, I think.
The way that bit reads to me is like, I can think of a few examples through the past 30, 40 years of history of government saying, this is a priority, so we're going to create a big pot of money. Human Genome Project is my favorite example of this.
Yes.
Because
that's fair.
The dollars there, it was $3 billion to do that, which ends up being $6 billion adjusted for inflation. So I love taking that and comparing that to like what Mark Zuckerberg has spent on the metaverse. And it's like, man, we could have had 15 human genome projects for the metaverse, which still doesn't have legs, right?
Christ.
But the more modern example is the good news for the climate right now. Is the pace at which solar has radically gone well. And you're right that we can't just say oh, we need this, so go build it. But government can say, this is a priority, so we are going to create lots and lots of funds for researchers doing work on this thing. And I mean, if I'm going to be a jackass about it in ways that I agree, let's have lots and lots of funds for that, and not a lot of funds for go to Mars. Because sure, we'll try to go to Mars in 300 years, but not now. Come on. But having government say, these are social priorities, and so we can't just sort of create the money and therefore the science will exist. But the thing that government can do is create the money and then hope that scientific research figure stuff out along the way, right? The story of why we didn't end up with it, K.R. Drexler's version of nanotech, is they created a bunch of money for nanotech, and then the researchers went into the research and said, nope, that's not going to work. To me, that's a win, where there was all government can do is create that money. Again, I don't do funded research. I read old Wired magazines. So my joke during the Doge years, because I had a bunch of friends and colleagues who were losing major grants and were really had real problems. And my personal joke was yeah, they can't touch me because I made the great career decision to never do fundable research. There was no money to take away from me. I read magazines at a coffee house and then share thoughts about it. But I would say amongst my colleagues who apply for NSF grants, man, they spend a lot of time having to fill out forms. And I read the Abundance version of maybe not no forms, but fewer forms. Okay, sure. Again, don't be quoting Bhattacharya on that. I'm with you on that. But that the broad brush, because when we talk about the future that we want, I think the version of the future that I want, it's not all of abundance, but it's a little bit abundance curious, because it is I would like a government that collects tax money, particularly from the billionaires, because we need to deal with just how radically out of whack inequality has got and how that influences everything. And then spends that tax money on things that we believe are public goods and social priorities. And that doesn't mean that you create a pot of money for cold fusion, and therefore you get cold fusion because science is still science.
Yes.
But it does mean that, like, if government were to say, yeah, we need renewable energy, and so we're going to spend a bunch of tax money on a public priority of research on renewable energy, like, that probably produces something, because that interacts with a scientific community that follows its incentives, does a lot of research on that, hopefully learns a thing that we do not already know, and helps make the world a better place. Like, that still ends up being very pragmatic of like, hey, let's raise tax dollars and then spend those tax dollars on things that are good, and then adjust as we go, as we learn. Like, I don't think that's going to get us towards the Jetsons. I do think that allows us to build a better tomorrow by creating the context in which scientists can go do the science for real.
I agree with that. And I also agree that there should probably be fewer forms for grant funding.
That'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay.
It's not the top priority, but like, yeah, that's sure. Okay, that sounds good.
I still have problems. I'm still skeptical about like the abundance agenda, but I see your point and I largely agree with you. I just think that the more important point is that Ezra Klein is wrong.
I guess what I would say is, have you read Jen Pahlke's book?
I know about Jen Pahlke's book, but I haven't read it.
I think it's really good. And it was actually like, I thought it would be a good book, and it was a better and more impressive book than I was expecting to get from it.
Can you describe the book for our listeners?
The book is called Recoding America. So she spent time during the Obama administration helping to set up the technical side of, like 18F and US Digital Service, helping bring techies into government to help government work better, and learned a lot of lessons about, we have set things up so that it's just really difficult for government to find out what things aren't working well. And there are a bunch of little bureaucratic fixes that we could make so that government would be in a position to know that things are wrong at sort of a granular level and fix them. So like, it's about like reporting structures and like getting away from like waterfall development cycles and a bunch of stuff that I am not positioned to have thought about a lot. But as soon as I started reading, I was like, all of this makes sense and would help government. Like that, we have a trajectory that started probably during Reagan of viewing government as just always the problem. And it's a set of ideas for how to help government, when it's well-meaning, actually provide the things it's trying to provide by getting out of its own way. And like, she considers those part of the abundance movement. And again, like, there's a lot of versions of abundance and I deeply mistrust many of them. But like her version of it, I was like, yeah, that sounds good. Like, first we need to like win the government back from the authoritarians, because a version of abundance that is just like building concentration camps is, I don't know, I would say obviously bad. But once we have won the government back and we are trying to rebuild the administrative state, I think there's a set of good ideas there for how to build it so it's a little more functional.
So we got to wrap up, but
sure.
I know people who really like that book and I know people who really don't. And I haven't read it, but I probably should read it at some point, but I am skeptical. And one of the things that I think is troubling about the abundance movement, and I think you probably agree with me about this, is who some of them have been hanging out with lately.
Okay.
And
I wrote about that a while back of like, what does your movement stand for if you're inviting these people to be the speakers at your conference? Like, come on, guys.
And these people, just to be clear, some of them are like effective altruist people. Some of them are people involved with, well, who were you finding?
I need to look up the blog post to remember the exact name. There was a guy who got invited who had argued for abundance, but for ICE. Like, help the Trump administration be way more, and like, again, like, that guy's sort of a shit poster, but also, why are you inviting him to be on stage?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're going to wrap up on that unpleasant note, I'm afraid. But I think whatever a good future looks like, it's not going to have ice in it. So good. Okay. Well, Dave, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And obviously we're going to have to bring you back to complain about more books together.
And hey, next year when a good book comes out, bring me back then too, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yes. I mean, assuming that it's good, Dave. I mean,
Okay. So just so your listeners know, if I am not invited back on the podcast in early 2027, it means that Adam Becker has decided that my book sucks, and I'm aware of that, and it hurts. Those are the stakes there.
That's
Either
right.
I come back or judgment has been rendered.
That's right. If you don't come back to talk about that book with me, it means that I believe that your book is bad and you should feel bad. I am Adam Becker, and this is Dreaming Against the Machine. Thanks again to this week's guest, Dave Karpf. You can find him on Blue Sky and also on Substack at The Future Now and Then. Next week's guest is Shannon Valor, a philosopher of AI and author of a book called The AI Mirror. And we have a great conversation about how what we see about AI says more about ourselves than it does about the technology. To submit questions for future guests and to suggest other guests, and to see more pictures of Babka, join the conversation on Patreon. You can also find us on YouTube, on Instagram at DATMpod, on the web and on Blue Sky at dreamingagainstthemachine.com, or just find us wherever you get your podcasts. Dreaming Against the Machine is a proud member of Multitude Productions. Our executive producer is Nick Carissimi. Our associate producer is Rosie Thomas. Our theme music is by Jared Emerson Johnson. Our show logo is by Nick James. And our fearless leader is Babka, the greatest cat in the observable universe. I'm Adam Becker, and I'll see you next week.